Good afternoon and welcome to MedTech Crossroads. Today, our 103rd episode, Friday, April 29th, 2022. Today, the last episode of our early stage funding series. We've been hearing from investors all throughout the early stage ecosystem. And today, I'm going to be joined by Patti Glaza from Invest Detroit and ID Ventures. After that, we'll have time for your questions, and we're looking forward to rounding out this series. Before that, just a couple announcements. First, the Midwest Growth Capital Symposium is happening virtually May 17th through 18th, 2022. So you can attend that. We're going to be part of that and be part of a panel there. And coming up later this fall, September 20th in Kalamazoo, Michigan, back to live, the MishBio Michigan Medical Device Summit is happening. So we're sure looking forward to that. Come fall. We don't want the summer to go too fast, though. We want that to still be there, and then we're going to get to September 20th. After this series, in partnership with our friends at ArborHive, we're going to be doing a series called The Clinician's Perspective. That will be May 6th, May 13th, and 27th. You've heard us talk so many times about how important customer discovery is and understanding the voice of the customer. Well, of course, the folks over at ArborHive, all about bringing physician innovators together. We're going to talk to them and just hear some clinicians' voices. What do they think are big issues? Let's talk to them. We'll have some fun with that. But today we round out early stage funding. And last but not least, she's going to hate me for this, but she was listed as one of the 100 most influential women by Crain's Detroit in 2021, Patti Glaza from ID Ventures. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
It's good to have you back. And back, everyone's like, back. I mean, I know, but, well, so I got to show a slide here. We got to give Patti credit because you started our world of videography and doing interviews. It was this back in, I think it was October 2019. You can still find it on YouTube if you want, and we'll probably post a link to it. You had done an article, I think it was like a blog post or something, about startup budgeting. And I just thought, wow, there's Patti. She's got all these things to do, and yet she's got the time to sit down and tell startups, not just about whatever's happening acutely, but I see a problem, I want to address it, I want to talk to you about startup budgeting. So then I was like, Patti, can we put that to video? And that video is out there, but I have to give you thanks for getting us started in our little journey.
Oh, you're most welcome. So I'm 1 and 103 is what you're saying.
That's it. So we're going to have to get you back in somewhere more like 150 rather than that. Oh, that's great. So, Patti, I want you to tell us, and is a question I often ask folks when somebody's been in the community and is just really a fixture in the community. Everybody knows you. Everybody knows that you're there. And so there's some part of me that always wonders, what makes a person crazy enough to come back and do it again and again and again? Because the kind of work that you do is hard. It can be hard. It can, as we've talked to investors, I think one of the things that can be very, maybe not boring is the right word, but you sit through so many presentations, you see so many things, you see time and time again people coming and telling stories that after a while have to just kind of blend together. Tell us about your history. How did you get to do what you do, and why are you still doing it?
Sure. So I started my career in tech consulting. I was a coder. I caught my bug for startups when I came to U of M to get my MBA. Okay. And instead of doing a traditional internship, I was fortunate enough to get a analyst job with, at the time it was Avalon Investments, so it was Chris Isaac and Rick Snyder's first fund. So got exposed to taking sort of that kind of being able to jump from industry to industry and that tech background into see how I could apply it to analyzing startups and helping startups. And I fell in love. I loved it. Went into startups, so I was part of a health IT startup called Health Media here in town, and then went to work for a company called Small Times Media that was at the center of MEMS and nanotechnology applications, and then spun out a company with some kind of fellow founders in the nanotech space and the clean tech space, which was really hot back in 2007, 2008. So really sort of went from that taste of venture to running companies and being a CEO, and then came back to venture in 2011. I worked for a national fund called Arsenal Venture Partners, and sort of kind of really, as a principal, started to really understand the mechanics of the business. And then I came to Invest Detroit in 2014 to lead the investment team. So you talk about that bug, why do I do it? It's hard running your own company. You know that, running your own company. It's difficult. So how could I translate what I learned as an operator into making it easier for the companies I was investing in? And so being able to apply at the earliest stages, sort of that, if I had known, what would I have done differently? If I could help somebody. And I really do gain a lot of personal sense of satisfaction being able to help folks navigate the hard roads that I traversed.
Take those lessons and apply them. Well, it's interesting you say that, because I think it took some years in the local ecosystem for especially startups to recognize that their venture partners were more than just a money source, right? That there was stuff that came along with it. There's expertise, there's connections, there's all this stuff. And what you just said sort of rises to the highest, the cream sort of rises to the top there of, you're not just in it because of some technical thing, you're in it because you see that you can bring this expertise of a company founder and share that as well as the resources to move companies forward. So I think that's really neat, because it just sort of speaks to this lesson that I feel like the community's had to learn over the years.
Yeah, and being a founder, you're usually really good at either the industry or you're really good at a technology component. But you most likely, especially in our area, haven't run a company before. And so just being able to have a partner, whether it's a venture partner or angel partner, whoever that is, be an additional resource for you to help guide, I think is really important, especially in communities like this where we've got great pipeline of technologies and entrepreneurs and solutions being built, but not necessarily that full scope of talent of folks who've done it 5, 10 times.
Yeah, and if a founder's willing to take advantage, I think we'll talk later about like pipeline and what you guys look for in companies like that, but I got to imagine one of those things is to have founders who will take that advice and listen to it and make it their own.
Coachability.
Coachability, there it is. That's great. Well, we want to know more about Invest Detroit and about ID Ventures. And I think we've got some slides here for that. And I'm just going to hand you the clicker. It's the right arrow there, which I get to do because you're here in the studio. This is so cool. But take us through the IDV team and what you guys have been up to over the last, I think we said, is it 12 years?
12 years now, yeah.
Wow.
So the venture team was started in 2010 to really fill the gap in early stage financing in the region. So the team started off as one person and has grown now to 7. So we have 5 people who are dedicated on the investment side, 2 folks that we have who are focused on the portfolio, though there is a lot of crossover. But now with the, we've got, just incredible talent from data science to marketing and sales to engineering. It's just a really good breadth of team in terms of experience and different areas of expertise and interests.
Wow, so not everybody there is just, oh, I did management or something. They've been across the spectrum of things.
Yeah, and we have folks who've had their own startups or who've been part of other investment funds or who have, just very different, come from corporate kind of innovation. So we're kind of touching all the different types of viewpoints. Because I think you have to have a team that, we think about diversity in terms of race, gender, sexual orientation, but there's so many other lenses too. And so I think the way we are intentionally building our team is, how are we different? And so you don't want cultural fit. I heard this one. Don't look for cultural fit, look for cultural addition. And so that's been very intentional on our team, which I think helps us build relationships with different types of founders, helps us build strong relationships. We all have, different founders that we really kind of roll up the sleeves with. And it helps us be a part of active in different organizations, community kind of training sessions, and all the different kind of opportunities there are for folks. We're all able to kind of find or help the community in different ways.
Yeah, I love that. Cultural, not cultural fit, but cultural addition.
Yep.
That's going to go on a T-shirt somewhere, I think.
Yeah, it's not mine. I stole that, but it was so good. I've always remembered it.
Those are the best ones. That's
Yeah.
great. I remember early in my career, the first startup I worked for, just that moment of realization. Oh, you went to engineering school and everything, and then you walk in and you go, that person who's doing the machining over there, they got a lot to teach me. Just that realization that it's not my experience, but it's theirs, and it matters to what we're doing here. It's really cool. Take us through. Tell us about Invest Detroit Ventures here. So you've got this cool team, multidisciplinary. You can click us through in terms of the next slide here. We've got a nice overview here.
Yeah, so this is the overview of just this past year. So we tend to invest between $2 and $4 million a year, and that's with 10 to 15 new companies and 10 to 15 follow-ons. So we'll write initial checks somewhere in the 100 to 200 range, and then we'll do follow-ons anywhere from 50 to 200. We kind of cap out now somewhere between 250 and 500, 600, depending on the funds we're using. But we do.
That's between investments in them, like overall. That's
yeah, overall total investment. Yeah, we start small because we're trying to fill gaps, trying to help companies get milestones that will help them raise more funding. And if we need to bridge or help companies kind of through those next stages, we can. But we have a lot of companies. So we have right now 100. I think we're up to 112 active companies now. So when you look at the amount of follow-on that's happening, there's only so much we can do. But we do try to be super helpful. That's why we have Jeff Ponders on our team, who is really dedicated to working with our portfolio, finding when are you going to be raising next? Who do we know that we can introduce you to? How can we help you think about your pitch? Anything we can do to be helpful as they prepare for that next fundraising. But yeah, so and as you can see, we're very intentional about the founders we invest in. So we don't have mandates. We're not like, hey, the portfolio must be, X% women or X% people of color. But we do, because we're intentional as a team to be thoughtful that if you have diverse founders, you have more of a diverse portfolio and a more successful portfolio. So we're looking for entrepreneurs that represent a really broad range, that represent our population. And how do we make sure that we're finding them and giving them those first checks to be successful?
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah. So these are our funds. So over the past decade, 12 years, we have had a mix of funds. So we started with the first capital fund, and our funding comes from a mix of types of organizations. So we have, and our backbone has been philanthropic. So the New Economy Initiative was our first partner in the first fund, which was called the First Step Fund, where we invested in 74 companies starting 2010 through about 2016 was about when we ended that. Then we moved into hybrid funding. So we philanthropic as a base, then we started kind of a hybrid for-profit funds in which we took private investors and the state came into that fund as well. And then we've evolved that now over time. So we have, we started the First Capital Fund as a successor to the First Step Fund, where, as you can see, we're really trying to plug that pre-seed, seed stage funding and make sure that there's enough capital. They're not big checks. 100, 150 only get you so far, but they can be catalysts, right, for other investors to say, hey, there's an institutional investor who's taking a chance in this company. Let's go alongside. They'll be watching it, help managing it, and being a partner for resource for that company. Or we can help fill in syndicates. So if it's going to take $500,000 or $1 million to get a company to a meaningful milestones, we can be a part of that group. And again, just fill in the gaps where we need to.
We had a guest on in a recent week who said oftentimes they're in a position where they might not be able to fully do a round, or they might not be able to make the round happen, but oftentimes by giving early assent or saying, yes, I'd like to see this go forward, they can help draw, sort of soft circle other capital. Do you guys often find yourselves in that role also?
Yes, absolutely. We often have funds that come to us and say, so what are you doing?
I'd like to take some notes there from you, yeah.
Yeah, well, Well, it's hard. And, one of the things we really try to be good partners with our other investors as well is if we spend a month doing deep due diligence on a company, let's share that quality work. So one, customers don't have to be called 10 times. Two, that the process is more efficient, that we're helping the community be better investors and to know where you need to help. I mean, I think the key, obviously due diligence, you're trying to figure out what companies you want to invest in, but most important, you're trying to identify the risks. And if you can identify the key risks, one, you can work with the founders to say, hey, if you're going to invest in them, hey, what's our strategy? How do we manage these over the next 12 to 18 months? Or if you're not investing, it's still a way to say, hey, here are things you can work on, and here are ways that will strengthen the business if you stay focused on these kind of couple items. So that diligence process, really important that we kind of, as a community of investors, are helping each other too in terms of doing that work.
You can get a sense with sort of the mind of the community. Okay, yes, we can all see how this would make it, or even after talking about it, no, we can't quite see how this would make it.
Yeah. Now we have a lot of, we have 3 active funds. What I always tell people, don't worry about which fund. We'll figure out which fund.
Yeah.
Just know we do fund pre-seed, and we'll talk about the FAM fund in a minute, through our early A. So you can approach, just if you're early A or earlier, come talk to us. We'll tell you if we, which fund or what we are thinking is most appropriate for the stage of your business. But don't you worry about that. Let us figure that out. Just come talk to us. And if we're not a fit, we do have a really good network of resources. And I always say, and my team, kind of that key focus is, even if we can't invest, is there 2 additional resources we can point you to, accelerator programs or more specialized investors or different types of funding options. So making sure there's so much stuff, there's so many things in our community. How do we make sure that they have access or knowledge of?
It's a really neat point you just made, because I tend to think in terms of funds. Oh, which fund should that get directed towards? And your point is, no, we want to be a door for these folks. If it's not us, we'll help place them somewhere, but just come talk, and then leave it to us to figure out where this belongs or doesn't.
Exactly.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So one thing I do want to say, we have these mix of funds. We have for-profit, nonprofit. What we are building towards is this evergreen fund. So if I'm successful in 10 to 15 years when I'm getting ready for retirement, we'll have a fully sustainable fund. And what I mean by that is every dollar that's coming back to us in returns is being reinvested in new startups, but all of that sustains itself. So we've invested about $25 million to date. And all of those assets, anything that belongs, that's been dollars been granted to us, we're reinvesting. So we're trying to hit that probably, in the 60 to 80 million of capital invested, where it is fully sustainable, can pay for all the capital we need, so we don't have to go out and rely on. We have to rely on fundraising as well, and for most founders, that's also surprising. Oh, funds have to raise money too.
Right. They don't recognize you have clients too.
Yes, I have clients, and while we're investing, we're also fundraising, and so and just like traditional funds. So, but yes, so we're trying to build towards this evergreen fund, and I'd say it should happen in the next 10 to 15 years.
That's really cool. To get to an evergreen fund, is that the kind of thing where those numbers that you shared, is that a number which investors look at as becoming evergreen, or does it really just depend on the fund type and what you're investing in? And is there any rules there, or is it pretty much all over the board?
I don't think there are hard rules. It's really what stage you're investing, what percentage of the companies are you getting, are you able to do follow-on, how much follow-on can you do, and how many winners are in your preview. For us, we only invest in Michigan-based companies, though I think we'll touch on it. It's getting harder to define what a Michigan-based company is in the new virtual world. But we only invest in Michigan-based companies, so that's our pool. So if that pool does well, which is why we're incented to really help make sure that the whole ecosystem is successful, but as that community is successful, our funds will be more successful. I think we're invested in, I want to say, 75% of all venture-backed companies in the state.
Wow.
So if there's a really good exit, there's a great chance that our team is invested.
You're part of it.
Yep.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. So I do want to touch on two funds that are top of mind. We just launched our second for-profit fund called IDV4. And we do have Bank of America is our key kind of cornerstone partner LP in that fund. And what's really nice about this is we're able to build upon, we launched our first for-profit fund was Detroit Innovate. And I didn't know. So when I came on to Invest Detroit to run the venture team, Detroit Innovate was the first for-profit fund we were going to launch. And when I was out raising money, I didn't know. I hypothesized that there were enough good deals that we could make a profitable traditional fund work.
Wow.
But we didn't know. And so we didn't overpromise. But we said, hey, but we're doing something good for the community. We're filling these later, pre-A gap in the ecosystem. We have good companies that are coming in from our earlier funds. We have a chance of making this work. And Detroit Innovate's doing really well. It's in the top quartile of funds of its vintage year. We still have 10 active companies and some really incredible companies like Work at Health and Orbian Space, and Genomenon. So we have some great companies in that portfolio.
From that first for-profit fund. Wow.
So we went to launch. Now that we're launching this second for-profit fund, we feel really good. We know there are enough high-quality deals that we have access to that we can help grow and move. So we launched this now. We launched it at $8 million. We hope to bring it up to about $20 million over the next year and a half.
This isn't your first rodeo, though, so you've got a pretty good sense of how this is this is going to work.
Yes. Yeah, not unknown. So. I also want to point out, so as we're adding to our stable of for-profit funds, we're also going earlier. So we call it the FAM program, the Funding Access Mentorship, but we're very intentionally targeting people of color and immigrants with that funding. But what can we do pre-MVP? There are very few institutional funds that will fund pre-MVP.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So and we'll leave life science out of it, but and traditional software or physical things. And so we have dedicated. Now we have 150,000. We have another funder who's given us additional 50 per year, where we're looking at how do we write checks of 10 to 25,000. Now we can write up to about 35,000, in which they can meet, they can have something.
Even earlier stage milestones here.
Yeah, they can get to a alpha product, or they can get some key things built to demonstrate the value, bring on some users. That friends, family dollars that aren't always available to folks. So how do we fill in that gap? And we expect a lot of those companies may or may not have success with that first idea, but that these are great entrepreneurs that we're investing in, and that whether it's this idea or the next, that we're helping them make their vision, get it far enough along to really demonstrate something.
Well, it's often the gap point, right, is you got an idea and everyone's looking at it, everyone in the community's looking at it going, this would be a cool thing to move along. And oftentimes there's just that one little bridge that they got to cross to be able to get to, oh, now we can consider this a VC deal, or now we can consider this for something else.
They have to hire an organization like you, or they have to, have to get their IP protected, or they have to get a key technology built. We had a great entrepreneur who needed her app built, and so we connected them to another Ann Arbor-based development shop, Serendip, to say, hey, can we get this pilot up with this amount of funding? And so now they have a pilot platform and can now go out and execute on some demonstrate, right, how the platform has value.
That's really cool. So not only did you sort of start with this philanthropic and then state and some investors, now you're moving to for-profit funds, but you're also sort of moving back. You haven't forgotten the little person there either. You're making some things available that would get them up to the level that your other things could take over and help them move forward.
Right, and that's why I think all of the entrepreneurs that have been in our portfolio, because it's the returns that are coming back from our First Step Fund and First Capital Fund that are able to now reinvest in programs like this. So it's the founders helping founders in the long term, but that's why we do take stakes in our companies and why we operate as a traditional investor, so that we can get to this evergreen fund, or that we can keep reinvesting in the community here.
That's really cool. Before you go on and tell us more about some of the stats, which I think you're going to tell us about here in a minute for Invest Detroit, it struck me just as we were talking that you stated that the funds started with sort of philanthropic contributions, and now they're growing sort of organically to facilitate all these different things. After all of this time in the business, what is the role of philanthropy? I'm sort of springing this one on you sort of live. What is the role of philanthropy in getting communities and efforts like this going? There's certain things that private business can do, and for-profit type things. There's certain things that the state can do. We don't often talk much about philanthropy. Open canvas. How do you think about that? It helped in getting ID Ventures going.
Yeah, I think philanthropy plays a critical role in ecosystems like ours, which have great talent and great potential, but not always the capital and availability of talent to go on its own. So, as from a role of philanthropy, like you think about, they're concerned about creating jobs and economic opportunity typically, and when you look at what we do in the high growth, high tech sectors, they're great jobs,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And those jobs, every time these folks move into a community, they're also providing jobs at the local restaurants, for the coffee shops, for the retail. They're also creating, especially with our diverse founders, they're creating new generations of wealth that are being opportunity. So and understanding talent and retention of talent. In order for Michigan to be strong, we've got to retain our smart kids, right? We've got all these phenomenal universities. How do we make sure that these kids have incredible, exciting, job opportunities here in the state? So philanthropy fills that early stage gap, because in other places in California and New York, Boston, the market solves that early stage gap. It does not, the market can't fill that. It's just still too risky. There's not enough, we have good deal flow, but it's high risk capital.
You have to get that critical density before you can then let everything take over.
Yeah, and so they're investing in building out a more diverse Michigan, more diverse spread of economic success. They're investing in jobs, in growth, and so I think it fits really well with the philanthropy story, but folks don't often make that direct connection because they think about schools or education or job training, and less so about, well, there's really is a strong role for grant-based dollars to fill in these early stage high tech, high growth gaps.
Wow, that's really really interesting. I guess it's something we don't often talk about. Is that role of that in the ecosystem? Thanks for touching on that. I think you got some statistics here for us in terms of. Oh yeah, here we go. So this is over the last 10 years.
This is, yeah.
Wow.
So we've invested now. So these are from the end of 2021, but so over $24 million now as a venture team. 180 companies plus that we've invested in. But this is a heat map of where most of our investments are. So while the density is certainly in the Southeast Michigan, the west side of the state continues to grow and provide some great companies. We have Michigan Tech is spinning out companies and entrepreneurs. And then we're also starting to see some great kind of hub network coming up in the Traverse City area. So really, we do fund across the state. Doesn't matter where you're at, but where there's density, you tend to see more companies, and they learn faster because they have people around them that can help support
They can
them.
bump into, and it
Yeah.
happens organically.
I like this slide, and it's less so about the raw numbers, but I want folks to understand how investing in high growth, high tech has a multiplier effect. So we started tracking jobs and revenue back in 2017, and really for the first capital fund, which was a program we started with the MEDC and the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation to keep filling in that pre-seed gap. And what I want people to see is after 5 years, the multiplier on revenue and the multiplier on jobs, and to recognize that investing in sort of the high-tech, high-growth ecosystem brings great returns, but it takes time. So 5 years is even too little, right? We're talking a 30-year investment in terms of when do you really start to see it pay off, right? Where you have a high density of exits, a high density of people who are going from one startup to the next, to maybe was a VP at marketing in one company and now is the CEO of the next. And so that rapid, and we're starting to see more and more of that here, but this is, people can't think, oh, I'm going to grant or invest $1 today and it's going to change Michigan overnight. It won't, but we've got some great partners over the years who see the long-term vision, but just for people to recognize, hey, just the 5 years of tracking how, we're hitting, millions of dollars, or hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue, thousands of jobs, and what this will look like in another 5 years.
And how long it took to get there, just to recognize this is the long game, right?
Yeah.
I think that is so important, Patti, because I know in our work we've encountered, be it various types of institutions, let's just say, all across the spectrum, who want to do innovation, they want to do product development, they want to get things there. And one of the most common failures is that they will start something, it will start to succeed, it needs a little modification, and instead of sort of modifying it and saying, yep, we see where this is going, they'll rip it all up and they'll start again and start that 30-year process over again. And sometimes it's every 6 months they do this, and it's like, that's not, how do you balance in your mind between when a change is needed to some paradigm that a community or an organization is following, like, yeah, this isn't working, versus when you say, let's just recognize the inherent time required for this growth?
Yeah, and I think markets change. I mean, look at COVID. Things will change from the macro perspective, and then what are we doing at the micro level? I was an econ major undergrad, so I tend to think of that.
A programmer, an econ major, and now, okay, wow, this is amazing.
So, you think about how, what can we do incrementally to kind of, what your point, what do we need to do incrementally, or what, I guess where I'll approach the question is where I've seen an incredible, we had such great vision in the state, I want to say 5-10 years ago, when we had fund to funds that were investing in venture funds to invest in Michigan. We had lots of dollars going to accelerator programs, sort of those boot camps that really helped entrepreneurs sort of get that first customer discovery and move it forward into funds like ours. And this, we're just seeing a reduction in that investment. And every year, those budgets get smaller and smaller, and both at the philanthropic and the state side. So we've had some great programs like Techstars that left the mobility Techstars, which wound up leaving the state. So how do we? And that's just one example, right? But you've got to keep that investment going. And I think as a community, everyone wants to fight for their program. And isn't my program the best? But I do think we've got a really good group of people here that care about the ecosystem, that if we just sit at the same table, and I think there are some good tables that exist here in Michigan, but we talk about, okay, what is working? Yep. Let's make sure we're not dropping the ball. Let's not fall back 5 years because we stopped providing these accelerator programs or these boot camps or these education or these early stage funds. So not dropping the ball, because I think we're at that precipice right now of thinking that we've solved the problem, which we haven't. We haven't seen any reduction in that early stage capital gap in the 12 years that we've been at this. If not, I would almost argue that that gap is even bigger. So, I just think we have to have the mindset of, yes, some programs don't work and it's okay, and we just got to say, yeah, that didn't work. But for all the programs that are working, we've got to keep that investment going in those programs.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we've seen over the decades now, I guess, companies that'll start in Michigan and leave Michigan because they couldn't find something. And in a lot of ways, that's a lot better now than it was. And I know of companies that have left that if they were here today, they wouldn't have left. They would have started and stayed here. But you're right, because you have to keep that ecosystem together doing what it does. Yep. Otherwise, you're right back to where you were.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting. But this is great. You're not going to hear that out of a lot of investors. Recognize the time scale of this, but it's important because you want this to be successful in the long run.
We do.
And this is different industries you guys are involved in. I mean, life science and healthcare down there, a lot of other things. Tell us about what you invest in.
Yeah, so our investment tends to mirror what you see kind of statewide as our strengths. So, and most people don't realize how strong a life science we really do between our universities and sort of the old Pfizer network. IT, SaaS, enterprise, small, medium business, we see a lot on obviously the software side. But we will do almost anything, right? So we started piloting some consumer product companies. Are having reasonably good success with that, so we'll continue to dabble in that area. But if it's advanced materials or if it's energy, I think it's more about, can our check make a difference? In really capital-intensive businesses, a $100,000 check might not mean anything, right? But if our $100,000, $200,000 check goes alongside, if we can help find partners or be a part of $3 to $5 million round, we want to be a partner that can help fill in some of those gaps. So I think it just really, I want people to walk away with, well, it doesn't matter what you do, as long as it's high growth and has a potential for additional venture. That's the key for us. Because we have a mix of philanthropic and state funding, people think, oh, well, they should fund every type of small business. And we really are focused on businesses that we believe can be venturable. They might not be venturable at that exact moment, but what they're doing and how they're thinking about scaling, it is a venturable opportunity. Would naturally
lead them to that.
Lead that to ventures. So that's kind of our cutoff point in terms of the difference between a small business and what we kind of call high growth, high tech. It doesn't have to be high tech, but it has to be high growth.
Has to be high growth. Yeah. And I want to ask you questions here about sort of the distinction, and I need to sort of move on towards some of the how do people work with you kinds of questions, but maybe just in a 10-second blip, do you see any major trends in, if we compared, say, life sciences or healthcare to other sorts of things, energy, fintech? Is there anything about maturity levels of companies that you find yourself investing in, or some inherently because of the industry they're in, when you get to them, they tend to be a more mature company or a less mature company? It may just be inherent in the business, but do you see any of those kinds of trends?
Yeah, I would say software, because it's less capital needed, you can bootstrap a lot of it. We tend to not see it until it's at least beta launch.
Okay, yeah.
As I said, we do have the earlier stage program, but we really won't look at something until, hey, you've got some users, they don't have to be paying users per se, but you've demonstrated that you've been able to bring up a platform, a MVP, and you're starting to, you can see where the market traction is. Life sciences is a whole different ballgame, because of the regulatory requirements typically and on the capital needed to get something down the pike.
Inherently earlier.
It's earlier. Teams are smaller. They're fractional. They just look really different than kind of the more traditional SaaS or software type companies.
That's got to take some brain resetting every time. Okay, what industry are we in here? Let's rethink about it this way. That's great.
Well, we have a team of 7.
That's great. I think this is the last slide we're going to go through, but this is a little history there.
Yeah, I just want to show really the fact that, our team has really grown a lot over the past 12 years. And what we've learned in terms of, how to work with companies, we learn every day. I mean, I think that's probably why I love my job so much is, we're doing new things every day. I'm learning every day. Every conversation I have, we're still learning. But we do have now a strong track record. And having this mix of nonprofit and for-profit funds, being able to bring that experience to the community to help as a resource, just really important. And what we see going forward, right? We see these funds continuing to grow into that evergreen fund so that we can continue and be the long-term partner for capital for early stage fundings here in the state.
That's so cool. I think I understand at some level why you're so good at what you do. You've got the economics background to understand the sort of some of the basic fundamentals. You've sat at a desk doing coding, so you know what the person in the chair cares about.
Yeah.
You've been the company founder, so you can empathize with that. And now you have a smorgasbord at your disposal to be able to say, what would help you the most, like really and truly. I think that's just so cool.
Yeah,
that's very neat. Well, I always like to ask people, Patti, what is the story you always have to tell? And part of the reason we ask that is the fewer times you have to tell it, the better, right? But with our clients, we oftentimes find ourselves telling the same stories about regulatory or development or whatever else. There has to be a story that you find yourself telling over and over again where people just don't quite come with the right mindset. And you have to disabuse them of that mindset. I mean, you're nice about it, but it has to get told over and over again. What would that story be?
Yeah, the first one that really came to mind, especially with the tie to life science and health tech, is that you really have to plan your business through commercialization, not to exit. We have had tons of entrepreneurs over the years who will come in and be like, oh, I only have to show you my business plan till this clinical phase trial because then we're going to, we'll be bought. Or we only have to develop this device to this point and then somebody will come in and buy it. And you don't know. You don't know that path. You don't know when somebody's going to buy you. So you need to build out a plan. And you won't have all the details, but you need to be thoughtful about how many years, what do your trials are going to look like, how much are they going to cost, because if someone's going to make an offer to buy you, they're going to need to know those, have the answers to those questions, and you should know them to understand the value of your business.
Yeah.
So making sure people aren't so focused on the exit, but focused on, hey, I'm building this business for the long term. I'm going to be here the 10, 15 years it might take to get to this to exit. So my plan, and again, it gets a lot less detail, it goes over time, but you can tell the story and you have that passion to be with that business for a long time because in the long run, majority of entrepreneurs are with their businesses 10 to 15 years. In reality, when you're starting pre-seed, seed stage. So showing that knowledge and commitment, and if you get bought out early, fantastic.
Right. Yeah, if you're all ready to start selling for the long term, chances are you got a much better chance of getting bought out. Yeah. That's always a warning sign to us when somebody comes and says, "Well, I'm not really concerned about that. I'm gonna license it by that point, or I'm gonna exit the company by that point." It's like, oh, you haven't quite seen how this works.
Yeah.
And conversely, it's the founders who we see shipping pallets of product and driving trucks across the country just because they're going to get that done. Those are the ones you get really excited about because it's like, wow, you're making this happen. Yeah. No matter what it takes, you can make it happen. That's so cool. We talked a little bit about, in previous series, we've talked about sort of needs and customer discovery. And I think that was something that you and I in talking, you had brought up is there always a fit for your idea? And I didn't know before today that you continue to be a mentor for I-Corps. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I'm a national instructor for both programs. Teach usually 2 to 3 cohorts a year. So really, and it keeps me at the top of my game too, because I think being able to effectively do customer discovery, but I hear. So when I do 60, 80 companies a year, I hear what's happening nationally across, and I hear sort of the struggles at the time of what these companies are doing. But it's just that I apply all the tools that I have learned from iCore and having to help teams develop quickly or figure out their story quickly, to the companies and how I evaluate the companies that come through our doors. But especially in life science, there's so many needs, right? Like, oh, how do I have all my healthcare data in one spot?
Right.
Or, hey, there's groups of folks who are not getting the same care of others. And there are, the key thing with healthcare, though, it's so complicated that even though there's a need and people who want something, you have to find where's the money
To pay for it.
to pay for it.
Yeah.
And there's so many heartbreaking stories where you can, like say, you can develop an incredible pitch of why this problem is so big and why so many people care. But if you can't tie that to someone who's going to write a check, it's not going to go anywhere. And so one of the things we really push teams, and it can happen in any industry, right? But we see it frequently in healthcare, is don't stop at the problem. Make sure you figure out who's going to write the check and understand what it will take for them to write a check. And really dig into that in customer discovery, because that's often a breaking point in models.
We were talking earlier about philanthropy, and there are certain places where a philanthropist might say, hey, I want to solve this problem, but that's not what we're talking about here, because most entrepreneurs go into it thinking, I'm going to be able to sell this solution. And that's what we're talking about here, is like, you've got to find the person who can pay that bill, and who's not only can, but is motivated to.
Yes. Yeah, because they've got, you think about priorities, and if it's not sitting at the top 5, if it's a nice to have versus a must have. Hey, you get that to me tomorrow, and if it's ready, here's a check. And you've got to be solving those type of problems, because there's so much noise, there's so much advancement in every space of healthcare that you really want to make sure that your solution solves somebody's really big pain enough where it's top of mind that they'll write that check.
What kinds of evidence for you? Days like today, I wish we had a complete hour and a half to talk about this, because there's so many things we could get into here. But I think this is an important question. What becomes, we're going to talk in just a second about what are tick marks for you, or what are the things you're looking for when you're looking at a company? But let's start with the question of, how do you know you have a market? What kinds of evidences are important for you that a company come with or can develop evidences? What is admissible evidence to the court, and what is not, for market questions like that?
Yeah, so I want to hear the stories of the folks who have the pain and write the checks. I want to hear it from their voice. So if they can articulate, Sally over at Henry Ford, when we sat down and talked about this is the advice that she gave. This is how we fit in. In order for our solution to get adopted, we have to go through these 4 steps. And, it's that depth of understanding of not just that there's a pain and, hey, great, there's a pain, but, okay, here's a roadmap of what we're going to have to do. We heard it from the potential customer. We know this. We know where the roadblocks are. We know it's going to take 8 months to get through the IT certification piece. So when we raise money, we've got to raise enough money to last through probably a year's worth of certification from IT. But that they really can articulate and not tell me the story of why they're passionate about the problem, because usually those are great stories, right?
If they're not, we shouldn't be having this conversation.
Right. And I do want to hear it. I want to hear why somebody passionately cares. But that next thing I want to understand is how much depth. And you can hear it when you ask the questions about, okay, well, who's got to sign off on this? What's how does this fit into a patient care plan? Or what's the decision tree in terms of the therapeutic selections? And if they've talked to physicians, if they've talked to the right people, they know what that looks like.
And you can tell they're coming with that information at that point, because you can hear through the voice of that customer that they've had that conversation.
Yeah, and it's 100% clear if someone has done and the I-Corps is 100 interviews, but have done the 200 plus, interviews you really need to do to understand that. And in how they talk about the business and what they know or they don't know, that work shows through completely in those early discussions.
Wow, don't come telling Patti that you've done customer discovery if you haven't, because she's going to see right through that one. That's great. One thing I want to do is tell our audience, if you've got any questions for Patti, please feel free to ask them. We'd love to take those here. Just checking really quick. It looks like we do have one. There's a request for contact. There's Patti, open to discussing potential business relationships with a referral source and what options she may be able to provide my clients. We can talk about that one later. There's not a specific direct question there, but we can follow up with that one. And as we talk about, how does one interact with you? You said come to the door, come through the door. Don't worry so much about what fund you're coming and knocking on the door for. But what are the things somebody should be worried about? It's going to be more about what they're bringing to the table and less about what fund am I approaching. What are the things that you're looking for? What's an appropriate stage company that should be coming and looking, and what should they bring with them in their PowerPoint?
Yeah, and what I typically say is don't worry so much if you're too early, but set your expectations. So like every investor, we like to know a founder for 6 months or so if we can before we do an investment. That rarely is the case because we're so early, but if we can, I'm more than happy to meet with a founder who says, look, I know you don't invest pre-MVP or until you get to certain milestones, but I wanted to meet you, get your thoughts, let you know what we're trying to do, build a relationship. Those are perfectly good meetings. It's just expectation setting of knowing that the chance of us writing a check are probably zero, but they're investing that time. I'm investing that time. My team's investing the time to build a relationship with someone who could be, who is and can be a great entrepreneur in the state. So for us, though, and it really depends on what industry you're in. But it goes back to what I said earlier about the check. Our check, up to $250,000 has to make a material difference. And whether it's in a larger syndicate or standalone, and we're fine going on our own. The check size is helpful or beneficial to those milestones.
It's got to make an impact. It's not just another drop in the bucket for something. Yeah.
It's also reasonable expectations on the valuation.
Okay. Yep.
In my early days, valuation really wouldn't come up until we really were like, we're excited about the deal. Let's now dig into the terms. I've learned to pull that almost into that first conversation just to see if an entrepreneur is realistic about where they're at and how much their business is worth and at the early stage. Because sometimes we'll have folks come in and be like, and we're 20 million pre-money valuation, and they're competing with companies who would take 3 to 4 because of market conditions or where the type of business they have. And so just reasonable expectations, because that also shows me they've done their homework from the investment side. So not just their customer discovery, but you're never done fundraising as a high-tech, high-growth founder. So you also have to know the fundraising side, and you have to know kind of where you sit from, what does normal deals like in your sector look like. So go talk to some other entrepreneurs who did deals and see what those expectations are. So kind of you don't have to lock in on the exact number, but you have to be within a reasonable range. Otherwise, we'll say, it's fantastic. We love, if we like the business, we really like the business, but the deal terms just aren't really market. And so if those change, please come back and talk to us. But for right now, we're going to pass, which, and invariably, usually about 6 months later, many of those teams will come back, right? Because it's education, and that's totally fine.
Yep.
But so having good expectations on what a normal deal looks like is another thing that I expect teams to have to come in with in terms of that first conversation.
Sure, there's some credit there to come in saying, I know what's in Patti's best interest. Like, I know what she's used to seeing. I know what she's expecting to see, because if you walk in completely oblivious to it, you haven't even done your, oh, let's use that word again, customer discovery, right? Like, because that's a huge part of it. Strikes me that even the early meeting where somebody says, I know you're not ready for this, but I just like, even that probably built a little bit of confidence because they understand something about what you're trying to do.
Right. Yeah, they've done a little bit of homework.
A little bit of homework on it. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Let's talk just a little bit about the pipeline out. You said before that one of the big lessons is plan the business, not just an exit. What do exits and pathways out of, I don't mean exits per se, but what do pathways out of your investment look like for companies? What are you hoping they target? What are kind of normal things that they go through?
Yeah. So the majority of our companies will be purchased. Certainly IPO, we've had a couple of those in our portfolio as well. But being able to sell the company is typically where we see things happen. We've been bought out by founders who have decided they're want to grow organically or a different path. We've been bought out by later stage private equity who are now kind of wanting a bigger stake in the company, so they buy out their early investors. So for us, we have multiple paths, but the most frequent is by exit. And this is a hard one and I think this for Michigan entrepreneurs to hear this. What can be really fantastic exit for a Michigan entrepreneur may not be such a great investment for an investor. So let's say you're a founder, you've got 70% of the company, you sell for $20 million, you are set, right? Like you did really well. But if an investor thought you were going to take their money and exit at $100 million or more, then the time kind of value of that money invested, you start to go, I want an entrepreneur who's thinking big, that's not going to sell out at the 20 million, but's going to grow into, the $200 million company. Now, we're pre-seed seed, so for us, we can still get good exits in the 20 million plus. It still does well for our funds. But but we do have to look at the entrepreneur and say, are they in it for the long haul? Are they going to sell out too early? Because in our traditional funds, we can't recycle that capital. So, it's just, if it's a 1.5x and we're hoping for a 10 to 15x, then that's, it may have been positive, but it's not producing the returns that our investors are expecting.
Want to see.
Yeah.
We're all familiar with the charts that get put up, and you got the projections and everything. But I think you're talking about something a little bit deeper here. You're saying not just can you see that there's a market, but are you willing to pursue it?
Yeah.
How do you make that determination beyond the PowerPoint slides that we're all familiar with?
Again, it goes to that listening to them talk about the business. Are they talking about the business in, hey, I just got to get 20 customers and then I'm going to sell it? Or are they talking about stage 1, stage 2, as we scale, as, sort of that vision of where, the big company that they're building versus the quick exit.
So anyone can put a chart together that goes up over time, but are there actually strategic steps that they're going to take to make that happen? That's where you sort of get to differentiate between, are they just putting a slide up? Very cool. Very cool. I want to take a quick look at our notes here because we are at the top of the hour. And Patti, I'm so thankful for your being willing to do this and talk to us about all the cool stuff that you guys are doing. I guess I might leave the last word with you as we talk to folks who are, interested. They're running their startup. They're moving it along. What do you want to leave them with today?
I want to leave them with Michigan. We may not have the most dollars in terms of investment or, but we do have so much here. And we do have, I think I've overused the word community in this conversation, but we've got a great set of resources between the universities and the smart zones and like different accelerator programs, and all the folks who do care and who spend the time doing office hours or doing educational sessions for you, being able to run sort of this educational series and committing to it. This isn't easy, and there's not a direct benefit to you for running these, but all the people care, and people are willing to spend the time to help people build good businesses here. So we've got great talent. Leverage the resources you do have, but advocate. Our citizens have to advocate as well for, hey, we should care about the high-tech, high-growth sector in the state. We should, be investing in this area. It's not just about the next auto plant, which is important, but we've got to be thinking about the sort of the tech factories that we're developing too, if you want to use an analogy, and how are we investing in those type of businesses as well for the long-term growth of the state.
Is there things that you recommend that people do to try to encourage that from wherever they're sitting?
I do. I think, one, participate. If you're able to, participate in the community. That's how we get stronger. But you also, not everyone is active legislatively, but letting your congressional reps know that this is an important sector for the state. As you're thinking, if you're in corporations, being able to say, how do we help enable this ecosystem? Because, hey, maybe the next company we buy is going to come from this group. So there's lots of ways I think people can engage. But again, being vocal, even just talking about it, right? That this is an important sector for the state, that we should be investing resources, corporate, philanthropic, and state dollars.
Wonderful. Patti Glaza, Invest Detroit, thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Thank
Appreciate
you
it.
for having me.
And thank you for being with us again today. We are looking forward to next week as we start talking to physicians. We're going to hear that voice of the customer. Thanks for being with us. Bye-bye.